Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM. This morning we have been discussing the online shopping obsession. We all do it, but where do we draw the line? I'll go straight back to the sisters to resume this discussion. Sister Yasmin, I'm going to come to you now. I think we've spoken a lot about, how we're affected by this, as a society at large. But specifically when we're talking about the youth, I think they're probably particularly vulnerable to this, being able to buy everything at the click of a finger.
Yeah, I mean, now especially with I keep talking about the devices, but on certain social media sites, you have groups, you have pages, you have profiles set up to sell things.
Yeah.
So they're so accessible. I think you can, the youth are more, likely to be ending up spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
On social media sites because it's so easy. And then I remember this news piece a few months ago. I think I read it. And it was about a young boy. He was probably like 3 or 4. I don't know if you guys heard about it. He had his mother's iPhone, and obviously the application store has everything, all the details already registered. And he ended up buying loads of games, and he spent so much money. So I think they are quite vulnerable to that because they don't understand. And obviously us as well. We have terms and conditions, and sometimes you just skip loads of things and you just agree to anything, and you give people permission to do things with your information.
I've heard this before, actually, where kids have kind of jumped on, a laptop or
it's so
another
easy,
device
right?
and been able to kind of order things.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's literally just at the click of a button.
Exactly,
so,
yeah.
I think we had an incident like that. One of my nephews was playing on like the PlayStation or whatever it was, and there was a demo version of a game, and he managed to download the full version and essentially buy it. My brother didn't find out until, the bill came.
Wow.
And then he was trying to call them up and undo this, but, at that point it's kind of too late. So it's almost accidental now. You don't think about where the money is coming or going. You don't see that money anymore because it's all so remote.
Yeah,
so
that's it. Money itself has become a kind of abstract
Exactly.
idea, really, hasn't it? It really is just a figure in your bank that, goes up and usually down in my case. But I think, what about how these kind of online shopping facilities are sort of geared towards, younger people?
Yeah, as Nusrat was mentioning earlier, the celebrity lifestyle, obviously, I think we're all affected by celebrity lifestyle, but the youth especially, because they're discussing it in schools and colleges, and, before it used to be this idea of who has the latest Pokemon cards or, the Crazy Bones or whatever, the little figures. And then it was the trainers and then having a certain brand on your bag, all this, materialistic things. And then you have the celebrities that are endorsing this and they have, these pictures of them looking so happy with their, such and such big label brand. And then I think they are kind of affected by this because there's this idea, as Nusrat was also saying, keeping up and, it's this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Whoever has the latest need to try and have the latest. And now it's not so much the Joneses, people like the Kardashians, all these big celebrities that, their lifestyle is out there for everyone to see. And I think the youth particularly, they pay a lot more attention to it because I think it's very appealing, very cool and hip.
Less discerning as well.
Yeah, so,
There is another factor that comes out of that, which is essentially the migration of cultures along with those goods.
Yes.
So you might see something and it seems slightly, removed from you because it's, in the States or another part of the world.
Yeah.
But if you can access it so easily, suddenly you're not just buying goods, but you're buying a way of life, you're buying a culture, a way of presenting yourself. So it's more than just the material.
I think it's absolutely true, and it's a lot more accessible than it was when we were younger. It literally, like you said, the click of a finger, and it's not just products that are kind of up for sale now. It is lifestyles, and if you want to have this lifestyle and you want to, be this fantastic person, then you can.
Then you can.
Yeah, you can basically, at a price, and that's obviously quite a dangerous idea to push. So, kind of talking about this, what are the effects of this online shopping culture that we've now adopted?
Well, I think there's two things. The first level is personal and the second is a bit more broader. So on the personal level, it's quite interesting. There was a study done with people in Iceland after the recession. And so some psychologists sort of followed some families around, followed some people around. Because of the recession, some people put their focus more on regaining that material loss that had occurred during the recession. And other people thought, well, do you know what? Forget the money. I'm going to focus on my family, focus on these other things. And after some time, they found reports that basically those people who focused on money had the lesser sense of well-being than those who focused on their family. So on a personal level, there's that very obvious result where, you end up with, a greater well-being if you distract yourself from those things. But on a wider level, we find that when certain elements in society are consuming at a very indulgent pace, really it results in deprivation of other people because there's only a limited number of resources.
Yeah.
We tend to think of our transactions in the sense of, oh, I'm just going to buy something, it's just between me and the tradesperson. But actually, as Muslims, we have a greater responsibility as to how that wealth is being spent and looking at the wider causes, not just the personal ones.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of there's sort of two things here, isn't there? We've got, you know, we can see the kind of negative impacts of this, you know, online shopping culture, but I think I can also see some positive effects of it as well. You know, I've got a friend who's kind of very infirm. She finds it very, very difficult to get out and about, and now she can do things like prescriptions online. She can do things like shopping online and things like that she would have really relied heavily on.
Even your groceries, I mean, the elderly people, I always see the grocery vans come up near our roads. You know, the elderly people, they have access to that. I think, it is a positive thing.
There is definitely benefits,
I think it really kind of facilitates people, you know, that really need that service.
But I think something that also doesn't tend to get mentioned as well is actually that through this consumerist culture, there's a degree of actually having to live up to societal standards which are not realistic. It's not sustainable to live up to as well. And in turn, when we do consume all these things, when we become so immersed in consuming and gaining for ourselves, we develop that essence of selfishness, and that leads to a moral decline of the society as a whole. So, for example, I was watching, actually, just a few days ago, a social experiment done by Yusuf Arakat, who also known as FouseyTube, and he placed a pair of trainers, I think they were Yeezy sneakers, they were the red, the really limited edition ones, by the way, next to a person who was pretending to be homeless. And he did this to see if people would literally take those sneakers and not return them, and basically it's effectively steal from homeless people. And he found that actually only one woman actually pointed out it was wrong. Everyone else, if they had the opportunity, they would actually do that.
Really
so it just shows that, and the thing is, what made it even more sad is the techniques of neutralization, the defense mechanisms that they were using in order to do this. So, they'd use the example like, well, he was probably going to buy alcohol anyway, or he was probably going to use drugs anyway. But that's not, you know what, that's not even the real reason. It's the fact that you've taken something and you've deprived somebody else of this, and you've basically succumb to your greed. That's the main thing. So it's through that we have this kind of moral decline, and it's just a disease of the heart actually that just keeps to grow wider and wider. And Al-Ghazali talked about it in I think his book Poverty and Zuhud, which is asceticism.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting study, and it's quite upsetting, really, isn't it, to think about.
Think people would do that. You never think that. What kind of world are we living in?
Well, this is it, isn't it? You know, surely, you know, the moral fabric of our society should have evolved past that.
I think one guy actually gave what was, I wouldn't say it was a funny response, but I just could not. I just sat there with my eyes wide open, like, really though? I think it was one guy who actually walked up and said, "Oh, I stole it from him." And when Yusuf asked him, "Why did you do that?" he just said, "Oh, they're probably stolen anyway." So goes, "Oh, do you want to steal that off him too?" He goes, "Yeah." Goes, "Oh." So yeah, the fact that he thought it was stolen, so he thought he should steal it as well. So
yeah. So it's like the moral compass is really, you know, askewed.
The fact that people commit crimes as well in order to attain these things further ruffles up the moral fibre. So you find even within the Muslim community itself, some people will commit crimes and earn money legitimately just to afford a lifestyle that they know they can't sustain. And this is even prevalent within the marriage market as well. People start looking at things apart from taqwa, apart from their religious observance, and they start focusing on things like their earning capacity. I got one sister saying credit rating.
Wow.
Yeah. Because when
what car he drives.
Yeah, and what car he drives, and going to a shop saying, I don't want his card reading declined whenever we go out. So
but I think this is the thing, isn't it? You know, this is the lifestyle that we live today. This is the world that we live in today, isn't it? It's quite materialistic. It's quite individualistic, isn't it? And I think this facility of online shopping, it's only really going to feed into that, because it does cut out everybody else. As you know, as you said, Zara, it kind of, you feel like it's almost just between, you know, you and your screen, isn't it? And you don't think about anybody else kind of on the outskirts.
The thing is, if we can find a mechanism to curb the negative effects, because very importantly, as you pointed out, there are definitely positives to it. Like the ease with which, if you're at work and you can't sort something out, you can do it online, you can do your banking online. Definitely there's pros. But as Muslims, we've luckily been given a yardstick by which we can understand and determine when to say no and when to stop. And so we have that sort of that limitation, that thing which holds us back.
Yeah.
And so on that hand, we should be kind of, making the most of this advancement in technology, but at the same time using it for good, because as I said before, wealth and spending is not necessarily a bad thing. You can be rewarded for how you spend your wealth. But it's just how we actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, something that we haven't actually touched upon, if we think about this, this culture where everything's always open, it's always available, the other side of that is this has to be facilitated. This has to be, companies that say our call centre's open till 12 o'clock at night or something. There are people then that are going to be working and doing this job until 12 o'clock at night. And this is, again, if we look at our society and not just as a society, the community effect, this can be quite damaging as well. What are your thoughts on that, Nazra?
I think generally actually it can be very damaging to building relations and community cohesion within that, because when we find things becoming more open and particularly extending of hours, I know generally within Westfield actually they extend the opening hours particularly during Christmas periods as well. This not only fuels consumerist culture, materialistic mentality, but it also breaks the family bonds as well. The bonds of kinship are actually broken, friends, we become distant from one another, and even that ability to reconnect becomes oh so harder because of these kind of mechanisms that are available to us to consume and consume and consume.
Yeah.
And we find that effect actually particularly within children and the youth as well, where some children, whenever they want something, the ability to even share becomes difficult.
Yeah.
We find that's something that's becoming quite increasingly worrying, that some people can't share and some children within the society are willing, or members of society should I say, are willing to go to extreme lengths to attain things as well, and not caring who they hurt, and that's something.
But what
beyond
about, if we think about even the workers of these organisations?
I like that you mentioned that because I used to work in retail and I was working throughout Christmas, and I'd come home really late, like 12 nearly, because I'd have to obviously make the journey as well. And it's just like, who thinks about the people behind the till?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it is really tiring.
Even take it, another step further. If we look at, we've got, they're called sort of sweatshops, aren't they? These companies that are manufacturing mass, producing these items that we feel that we need to kind of facilitate our greed, and we're almost forcing them into a life of poverty.
And how much do they earn? And it's all because because we need so much, we're consuming so much, and they're they're not getting hardly a penny compared to what we're getting.
Absolutely,
out of it.
and it's
really
this, this throwaway culture, isn't it? You kind of buy something, you don't buy it to last. We buy it, almost for a season, and then we throw it away.
Buy something and never wear it, for example.
We become really individualistic. And as Muslims, we have to be considerate about other people, and obviously our ummah as well. The people that are in these sweatshops that you mentioned, for example, in Bangladesh, they had that issue. These people are Muslims as well. Even people in general, we have a duty towards them. We can't be inconsiderate just to feed our needs, and they're getting the bad side of it.
I think this is key, isn't it? Our duty. What is our duty? Everything we do, there's the potential for kind of either punishment or reward, really. So let's have a think about our Islamic obligations, and what's the Islamic perspective on this online shopping obsession, or just shopping in general, Sister Zara?
So I think, as I kind of touched on before, the primary focus, as is set out by Islamic values, particularly in terms of economics, should be to ensure that everybody's needs are first satisfied.
Yeah.
Once that is done, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody, not just yourself and your family, but your neighbours and wider than that. If we're not talking on a greater scale than that, and then after that, in the pursuit of luxuries, it's kind of more laissez-faire. It's up to you. You can, if you want to, anything that you do obtain, you're going to be accountable for. Like, did you really need that? Why did you spend that amount? Why, what did you need that for? But we're also kind of warned against the extremes of both. So, for example, in the Quran, for example, 17:29, it says, I'm paraphrasing, but do not keep your hands tied to your neck, as in don't be stingy.
Yes.
But also don't, completely extend it so that you lose everything and become basically insolvent as a result. So it asks us to be balanced in this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it also says in chapter 102, the first verse, Alhaakumut takathur, which is, and you compete you rival to acquire.
Yes.
To acquire. What is that all about?
Yeah.
And not only are we, expending our wealth, but also wasting time. And time is the most valuable commodity for Muslims.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we see this mentioned again and again, don't we, in the Quran and Hadith about how we use our time and how we're accountable for this. And I think this thing with the online shopping and online facilities, it can become, it does steal your time. Literally consuming. Yes.
And we were talking about accountability. We have to always remember, the Islamic perspective, for example. We have to come back to the basics. Why are we here? Are we here to fill our stomachs, our wardrobes, or are we here for a greater purpose? Are we here to worship Allah, which is obviously what we're here for?
Yeah.
So we have to, as you mentioned, Surah Takathur is, Allah is saying, worldly things, a competition, and accumulating all these things, divert you from the real message, which is, your life, your purpose, and that you will eventually meet your grave. So and then the ayah goes, "Hatta zurtumul maqabir." So until you visit the graves,
you won't realize
exactly until you won't realize, and all these things, they divert you from Allah and what you're here for, the afterlife.
Yeah.
So we have to think about that in terms of how it affects us and our outlook on life. So but again, it's not we keep thinking bad of this, like you mentioned earlier, Zara. It's not a bad thing to have wealth. Many of the companions, people like Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, one of the 10 people that were guaranteed Jannah.
Absolutely,
he was very rich, and he I remember reading about him. It's quite funny. How we find coins in our sofas and between our beds and on the floor. He used to say, he used to find rocks, around his house, and underneath them he'd find coins. So he was like minted. So it's not a bad thing, but it's the way you use it. Exactly. The way you use your wealth. Exactly. Because you will be accountable for that.
And this is it, isn't it? I think we've become very good at kind of separating our kind of, sort of spiritual stuff from our, kind of everyday stuff. And we shouldn't be doing this.
We shouldn't really be separating the spiritual aspect from our day-to-day life, because the two go hand in hand, particularly with this whole idea of consuming all of these kind of things like, money, wealth, and how it diverts us. It does divert us from our purpose, but even when we look on a day-to-day level, our spirituality takes a bit of a nosedive as well, and it's very detrimental. I mean, even in terms of purification of the heart, it's very difficult to actually sometimes know God and to feel at one with God when you're consuming and always thinking about what should I buy now, what should I do next. It can be quite detrimental to your spiritual development. And I think even people such as Al-Ghazali have mentioned this as well. Hamza Yusuf has written articles and done lectures on this as well, and so has I think when we look at it, there's also another person that doesn't quite come to mind yet, but even Sheikh Nazim has also mentioned this as well, very much within the Hadras of reflecting upon.
We have this concept in in Islam. It's actually the antidote to consumerism, which is the idea of zuhud, and you mentioned that earlier. But the thing is, when we translate it and say it's asceticism, we think of things like complete denial, which isn't Islamically correct.
Complete abstention is also not.
So the idea that we're meant to have is you have the dunya in your hand, but you do not let it into your heart. So that's how we should view things like wealth and shopping and whatnot. You shouldn't let it get into your heart, because that's the other thing that's mentioned in Surah Takathur, the first ayah, Al-Hakum Takathur, as you mentioned. It can be, one of the translations or interpretations can be that you take pride in these things that you have and you think you're better than someone else. So you shouldn't let that's entering your heart, isn't it? When you think you're better because you have, X item or whatever.
And the thing is, it's the wrong emotion. Rather than pride, you should feel grateful and humble. But rather we go the opposite direction and think that we have acquired this of our own ability, but actually it's God that's given you, the ability to...
No, absolutely. Some really interesting points have been raised this morning, and I think a lot of things for us to think about. I will certainly be thinking about, my online shopping habits. So Jazakallah khair for this discussion, sisters. We are accountable for the wealth that we have and the way we spend it. Whether we have a little or a lot, it is a test for us, as it was a test for those before us. I leave you with an ayah that reminds us of the path we should take. And they are those who, when they spend, do not do so excessively or sparingly, but are ever between that, justly moderate. That's from 2567. Some interesting points raised by the panel this morning, but please continue to give us your feedback. You can email us at womensam@islamchannel.tv, or you can tweet us at islamchannel #WAM. But it's just about time to go today, but if you've missed any of our shows from this week, catch our highlights on Sunday at 3 p.m. We will be joining you again tomorrow morning at 11 when we'll be discussing the issue of seclusion. Make sure you join us for that. Just before we go, a quick reminder of this week's competition.